So what does it really take to build a plant? It seems like a simple question, right? But for centuries, it was this profound scientific mystery. Today, we're going to crack the case. And it turns out the clues are hidden in plain sight, right in the soil beneath our feet. Let's kick things off with a fascinating 17th century experiment that really started it all. Our story starts way back in the 1600s with a really curious scientist named Jan van Helmont. He did something pretty clever. He took a small willow sapling, weighed it precisely, and then planted it in a huge pot with exactly 200 pounds of soil that he'd carefully dried out. Then, for 5 years, all he did was add water. And after those 5 years, he had this massive tree. That little sapling had gained over 164 pounds. Now, the obvious assumption, both then and now, is that the tree must have eaten the soil to get that big. But Van Helmont was a careful investigator, and he checked his evidence. And here is the twist, the part that blew everyone's mind. The soil, it had only lost 2 ounces. That's it. So if the tree's weight didn't come from the soil, where in the world did all that mass come from? Van Helmont figured it had to be the water. Now, he was definitely on the right track, but the full story, as we'll see, is way more complex. It involves a whole hidden world of essential elements. Okay, so that one experiment kicked off a huge scientific puzzle. To really solve this mystery once and for all, we need to uncover the secret recipe for building a plant. We're talking about the essential nutrients that are the true building blocks of life. So what makes a nutrient essential? Well, according to the official definition laid down by Arnon and Stout back in 1939, an element has to meet 2 really strict criteria. First, the plant absolutely cannot live, grow, and reproduce without it. And second, its specific job can't be done by any other element. No substitutes allowed, it's irreplaceable. And this chart, this right here, solves the first big part of Van Helmont's puzzle. A whopping 96% of a plant's dry weight is made of just 3 things: carbon and oxygen, which it gets from CO2 in the air, and hydrogen from water. But our detective story today is all about that other little 4%, the essential minerals that come from the soil. They might be a tiny slice of the pie, but trust me, without them, the entire system just collapses. All right, let's open our first case file, the core builders. These are the elements that form the absolute foundation of life's most critical molecules. Here's our first piece of evidence, a corn plant that's clearly in distress. I want you to notice that distinct V-shaped yellowing. See how it starts at the tip of the older leaves and works its way down the middle? That pattern is a classic fingerprint, a dead giveaway for a very specific nutrient deficiency. And the culprit is nitrogen. Nitrogen is the fundamental building block for a plant. It's a core piece of proteins, it's in DNA, it's even in chlorophyll. Without enough of it, the plant literally starts to cannibalize itself, breaking down older leaves to send that precious nitrogen to the new growth. And that's exactly why we see that V-shaped pattern. So, the key takeaway? Nitrogen is basically the plant's protein powder. No nitrogen, no growth. Okay, next clue. We've got a plant that's turning purple. Now, this isn't some new fashion statement. It's a major distress signal. The plant is making these pigments as a stress response, and it's pointing us to a completely different but just as crucial deficiency. And in this case, the culprit is phosphorus. Look, if nitrogen is the builder, think of phosphorus as the energy manager. It's the key component of ATP, which is the universal energy currency for every single living cell. It also forms the backbone of DNA and RNA and is critical for making cell membranes. So without enough phosphorus, the whole energy transfer system just grinds to a halt, which leads to stunted growth and that telltale purple color. All right, so we've seen how nitrogen builds the plant and phosphorus powers it. But what about defending it? Our next case file is all about the protectors and the specialists. These are the elements that give a plant its strength and shield it from harm. So here we're looking at a plant cell that's under attack from a fungus. But check this out. It's got a secret weapon. It's a layer of silica that gets deposited right under the surface. This acts like a microscopic shield, a physical barrier that makes it way harder for that fungus to break in. And the results are, well, they're striking. On the left, you see leaves without enough silicon, and they are just riddled with fungal spots. But on the right, the leaves that were fortified with silicon are almost perfectly clean. It's a really clear demonstration of how one single element can provide this powerful frontline defense, just by making the plant physically tougher. Now our next piece of evidence shows a totally different kind of structural failure. The new, young leaves on this plant are all twisted, they're torn, and they're malformed. This isn't an attack from the outside. This is a serious problem with the plant's internal construction. And to understand this, just think of calcium as the mortar that holds the bricks of a wall together. Specifically, calcium creates something called calcium pectate in the middle lamella, which is basically the glue that cements plant cells to each other. Without enough calcium, especially in those rapidly growing areas like new leaves, the whole structure just falls apart. And that leads to the exact kind of distorted growth we just saw. Okay, for our final case file, let's turn to the catalysts and regulators. These are the elements that don't necessarily form the structure itself, but they act like the spark plugs and the light switches that make everything else in the plants actually work. Here, we're seeing a classic symptom called intervenal chlorosis. That's a fancy way of saying the leaf veins stay green, but all the tissue in between them turns yellow. Now, the clue to this mystery lies right in the structure of chlorophyll. At the absolute heart of that molecule is a single atom of magnesium. Without it, the plant literally can't make chlorophyll and, well, the green color just fades away. Here is our last clue for today. This corn plant shows yellowing and some tissue death, what we call necrosis, and it's happening specifically along the outer margins of the lower, older leaves. This very distinctive pattern, almost like a burnt edge, points us straight to our final suspect. And that suspect is potassium. Potassium is the master regulator. It doesn't really become a big part of the plant's structure, but it is absolutely vital for function. It activates dozens and dozens of different enzymes, and critically, it controls the pressure that allows the plant to open and close its stomata. Those are the little pores it uses to breathe and manage water. Without potassium, the whole system gets thrown out of balance, and the plant's health just deteriorates, starting with those older leaves. So our investigation has revealed the secret lives of these plant nutrients. We've gone from the builders, like nitrogen, to the protectors, like silicone, and the regulators, like potassium. We've seen how just a tiny fraction of a plant's mass can literally determine its fate. Now, let's zoom out and see how these individual cases connect to a much, much bigger story. What you're seeing here is the nitrogen cycle. It shows that the nitrogen we just talked about isn't just sitting in the soil waiting for a plant. No, it's part of this massive global system, moving from the air to the soil, into microbes, up into plants, into the animals that eat those plants, and then all the way back again. Every single essential nutrient we've talked about is part of a similar, intricate dance that connects all life on Earth. And that brings us to our final question. We've seen firsthand how the lack of a single specific element can stunt, weaken, or even kill a plant. So as we think about how we're going to feed a growing global population, we have to ask ourselves, what does this botanical detective story really mean for the health of our soils and for the security of our food systems? The health of our planet, it turns out, truly does start at the cellular level.